everyone. My name is Christina, and I'm on the Vancouver Startup Week team. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are grateful to be virtually gathered on Indigenous land, regardless of where you are joining us from. I am grateful to be on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. I'm privileged to live, work, and play on these lands. First, I'd like to thank you for joining us for VSW 2021 and welcome to Consulting Extended by Coaching, hosted by Golden Point Solutions and Gerard. The session is part of the VSW Growth Track and is proudly sponsored by Innovate BC. Innovate BC is a Crown agency that provides small businesses around the province with funding, business coaching, and educational content. They're helping entrepreneurs and founders start and scale their businesses and adapt to the changes brought on by COVID-19. If you're looking for support for your business, make sure you stop by their booth to learn more about how they can help. I also want to thank Golden Point Solutions for being an event partner and also a sponsor. VSW could not happen without the continuous support from our community sponsors. If you have any questions for our speakers, please post them in the Q&A on your Hoover session. You can also upvote questions. That being said, I will now pass the mic over to Gerard and we will begin the session.
Thank you so much. Thank you for a warm welcome and a great introduction. I have my setups here such that I should be able to see the questions fairly easy. Let me start with the presentation. Can anyone confirm that you can see my screen and you can see the presentation?
Hi, Gerard, we can see it.
Amazing. Okay, so first of all, thank you all for joining. I'm very humbled that a few of you decided to join me today and allow me to present a topic that is very close to my heart, which is how to enable entrepreneurs to build a repeatable business by introducing coaching aspects, specifically executive coaching, into their consulting kind of business. In today's session, I will cover quite a few different topics, but if there will be anything that I will ask you to remember from this session, would be that it is the effectiveness that is the true measure of your service. As consultants, we have this notion that if we fulfill the contractual obligation of what we were contracted to do, this is where the work ends. And if the client is somewhat happy with what we've delivered, that's sort of the measure of success. What I'm proposing is that if you can show that effects of your work are of great value to the business that you're helping, and those effects can be multiplied, this is the true measure of your success. In today's agenda, I would like to cover a couple of things about myself. I will introduce myself and sort of explain why would you even want to listen to me. I will then touch on some differences between consulting and coaching. I'll explain what a growth plan is from a business perspective, of course, and then I will walk you through a use case, a rather simple example, but I think you will find it useful and easy to apply. So who am I? My name is Gerard, and I am a project manager by trade. Currently, I work for Unity, which is a company that builds 3D modeling software, game engines, and real-time 3D processing software. I'm also a freelancer and a project management consultant who's helping small and medium-sized businesses implement project management processes, but also methodologies. I also specialize in software implementations. So from time to time, rather than advise on project management frameworks, I would actually run the project of implementing some software. I'm also a certified coach. I'm certified by Canadian Coaching Federation. And in addition to all of that, I'm also a Toastmasters. I'm sure some of you have heard about Toastmasters as a public speaking and leadership development organization. As I said, I'm a small business owner aside of my full-time job. And as well as all of this, I'm also a massive coffee enthusiast. And my motto is that I turn coffee into results. And that's actually what is on my t-shirt. I'm not sure if the camera is picking up this well, but that's what it says. So let's talk about consulting and coaching. Consulting, for the most part, is focusing on delivering value to a business by solving problems, and you solve those problems effectively in two different ways. You're either educating or effectively consulting the business owners or business stakeholders, and you're guiding them on how a problem can be solved. In some specific cases, you're also tasked in implementing the solution that you put together. I'm getting a disconnected message. I'm not sure if you can still hear me.
I can still hear you.
Okay, maybe it's a different device that disconnected from this Bluetooth headset. Anyway, coming back to the presentation. Where coaching comes into play is where you're, rather than solving a business problem, you're effectively helping the business stakeholders grow as leaders, as managers, and as professionals, such that they can solve those problems alongside you or instead of you. And you would say, well, why would I do that? The main thing is you don't want to do it instead. You want to merge both. Any business doesn't have just one problem. A business, other than doing what the purpose of the business is, they face all sorts of problems on a daily basis. Therefore, if you can help the business team solve problems, but also help them grow as people who will be more competent to solve similar kind of problems by themselves, you're effectively going to help that business thrive. And a thriving business is something that you definitely want, because if they have financial resources to engage with you again, they will. And this comes back, and this is going to be a revolving theme throughout this presentation. If you can increase the effectiveness of the solutions that you bring to the table, you're going to generate repeatable business. And by combining the consulting side of things and coaching side of things together, you're going to be successful in that way. So what does the typical consulting look like? Well, it's fairly standard. You identify the problem that you want to, or the business experience. You conceptualize a solution and you provide some form of description of that solution. You don't go through the administrative side of things, so quotes, contracts, finance, all of that side, right? Following that, you either oversee the implementation of the solution or you implement the solution yourself. And you send your invoice, contract is ended, that's it, right? So you might ask, well, what's the problem with that? Well, there isn't any problem per se, but what we can do is do much better. And effectively, the question is, what can be done past the implementation phase, such that we drive more business and drive better solutions for the clients? But before we go there, I want to touch base on a couple of little things. Why do clients sort of stop thinking about the problem once the solution is implemented? Well, first of all, because when you implement a solution to the problem, whatever that solution is, and whatever the problem was, the minute they don't experience the pain of that problem anymore, it sort of goes into the background. It's out of sight, out of mind per se, where it's on to the next thing, right? The other thing about it is that once the immediate problem is solved, it is very rare that any results are actually measured and quantified, especially when the results supposed to be like long-lasting solutions. It's very rare for small and medium-sized businesses to actively manage and measure the results of any of their endeavors. In my practice, I see that pretty much other than Google Analytics and revenue or balance sheets, businesses don't tend to track any KPIs, any OKRs, or anything else in that matter. And what that does, it sort of limits their perspective of, well, can we do better, right? They don't have a baseline to which they can say, well, is there a better solution to the problem? In addition to that, small and medium-sized businesses tend not to have any long-term planning. And that's sort of by design. A small business tend to be very dynamic, depending on which client is bigger or what kind of demands the client may have, the businesses might pivot. Therefore, creating a 12 months to 3 year long strategic planning often is actually a waste of time because they don't really add that much value. And in 3 years, the business can change directions 3 or 4 different times. But that again limits their ability to sort of focus on growth and establishing a baseline for which they can measure whether they are more effective. The other side of things is the more personal side, which is, again, once the business owner or the business stakeholder stop feeling the immediate pain of the problem that you as a consultant were contracted to solve, they basically feel of it like, oh, it's done, moving on to the next thing. And often when they see a solution, they accept this as the best solution, which is not necessarily the case. And they just accept that as a universal truth, and they don't pursue it any further. And lastly, being professionals in our specific sectors, in my case, it would be IT. I'm often contracted to solve specific problems to either software implementations, sometimes hardware, but for the most part, anything that has to do with business software. And I find myself often having discussions with clients who have zero technical know-how. They know how to use the browser, they know how to use email and maybe Shopify or a couple of e-commerce platforms, but past that, they don't really have any technical skills. They only have the skills that are required to run their business. They might have other specific skills that are relevant to their business, but not technical skills. And what that does, it limits their sort of view of possible solutions. So when you introduce coaching to the business, what you can do is sort of help the clients grow alongside you implementing that solution, right? I'm going to give some examples in a minute, so maybe it will be a little bit more tangible. But effectively, what you want to do is not only focus on solving the problem that you're contracted to solve, but you also want to find a way to engage with that business long-term and help them build on top of the solution that you implemented. So if we take the typical consulting process, once you implemented the solution to the problem, what I would advise on doing is focusing on finding a metric that you can measure to really show the effects of that solution. Now, the more effective the solution is, and you can measure things like saved time, saved money, increased revenue, increased customer base, reduced churn, whatever the metric would be, the more you can show that effects of your consulting, excuse me, the more you can show that those effects are bringing more business or are repeatable and help the business grow, the easier it's going to be for you to engage in the next contract. It's very important to focus on that, on showcasing that in some tangible way. So saying, if you're going to go to the business and say, hey, I increased the traffic on your website, I potentially implemented some SEO techniques, and now you have far more traffic on the website, but the sales didn't increase, well, effects are rather minimal. If you can say, well, the traffic didn't go too much up, but your sales went up by 5–10%, this is something that you should focus on. An example here, what I would like to add is, one time I was implementing a push notification for sending coupons over text messages. And within first month, this business increased the revenue by $120,000 over the baseline from the previous month. That was around 7% growth in 1 month. That increase in revenue basically meant that the project that I was responsible for implementing paid for itself in a matter of 2 months. And immediately that engaged in a long-term planning for us to develop other solutions to increase sales. And that's sort of where the coaching aspect comes into play, because you solve the problem, you show the effects, you showcase your solution. But now what you want to do is take that win, the positive feeling of, hey, we have a win, we've delivered on something positive. You want to take that and you want to start looking at for other similar areas in that business where you can implement a similar solution or apply similar strategy to help that business grow. Once you have that in play, what you can do is start working with the business stakeholders to create something called a growth plan. I will get into the growth plan in just a second to explain it a little bit more. But if you do that and combine it with the implementation roadmap, what you can then do is focus on showing how the business stakeholders can grow their company by growing themselves and growing their business capacity, but also on where in that growth plan you and your consulting services fit in, such that you can create some form of like a roadmap of projects that you can implement for that business, right? Now, why would you want to do that? Specifically because if you're going to, one, show that you're effective and you can help grow their business. Two, you can help the business owners grow as business owners. And three, help identify other problems that you can also solve. You're effectively creating a loop that creates a repetitive business, right? So what is a growth plan? What exactly do I mean by a growth plan? A growth plan is a rather basic document. It's nothing, it's no rocket science. But effectively, it is a prioritized list of pain points that the business is currently suffering. And it's actually not that hard to come up with a list like that. It's a little bit harder in prioritizing which problems are more important to be solved first. Prioritization is a little bit of an art where you have to work with people who often will say, well, everything is top priority. And if everything is top priority, nothing is, right? So creating a list is not a problem. Prioritizing it might be. What you want to do then is map the pain points of the business to skill sets that either the executive team or the business owners need, or that you need to bring in to help solve those pain points. From that, you're creating short-term SMART goals. They can be SMART. I'm sure most of you understand what SMART is. It's specific, measurable, realistic, time-bound, and you're accountable for them. Remember the acronym. And what you don't want to do is create goals that are like 1 or 2 weeks. Those are tasks. If you're going to try to create big goals that are more than 12 months, you're effectively trying to push them into the strategic planning, where, as I discussed before, for many businesses, that is going to be useless because they will pivot in the meantime. But if you can sort of find a pain point, map it with what is needed to solve that problem, and then turn that into a goal, so sort of look into high-level implementation plan, then you can start adding elements of accountability, where you can say, well, you as a business owner are responsible for this. However, I can take some of that responsibility and I can implement yet another solution to your pain point. Right? So that comes back to that loop. So now you have identified what is next, how can it be done, who's going to do it, and you're sort of pointing at yourself, right? Obviously for the things that you can deliver on, but that's sort of where you're creating that growth plan and that implementation roadmap. And more important to anything of all of this is ways to measure success. The best way to build trust with the business is where you can say, I will know when I'm successful when this happens. So you're looking for that effects, you're looking for those results. And the minute you'll be able to hit those results, that loop is far easier to close, right? Because at this point you're saying, hey, I came in, I consulted on X, Y, and Z, you paid me X, but at the same time, your business grew Y, right? So this is where that loops come into play. What is a implementation roadmap? It's basically an extension of that first document. You cannot create an implementation roadmap without a growth plan. Well, I guess you can, but it's going to be less effective. And what you want to do is sort of turn those SMART goals into mini projects, right? So this is where on the timeline, you're providing a solution to a problem, right? You basically treat it as any other project. You're providing high-level estimates that are then can be turned into quotes. So you enter into that business process of actual sales. This is where you can also include things like necessary tools, and tools can be everything. Can be software, can be new skills, can be hardware or licenses, and basically you're just giving heads up to the business what is going to be necessary. And again, for specific products, what you can do is look into OKRs and start introducing OKRs. For those who are not familiar with OKRs, those are objectives and key results. So it's a little bit more specific measure of success for that particular mini project, right? You're measuring effectiveness at the business level, and you're measuring OKRs at the implementation mini project level, right? Just going to quickly take a look if there are any questions thus far. No. Okay, so where do you start? How do you actually take that theory that I presented, and how do you actually start doing that? Well, first of all, I think it is a common truth for almost everyone that is engaging in a business that we all can improve our communications. For myself, I joined Toastmasters around 7 years ago, and I'm still an active member, trying to learn about public speaking, about good communications, effective communication, because when we're communicating about problems and solutions, the way we do it matters. So very interesting thing about it is, if you're going to start asking questions like, are you happy with the solution? Well, you might ask, what is the problem with that question? Well, the problem is that it's a yes/no kind of question. The client may say yes and end the discussion there, or they can say no, and then you're in trouble because you have to find another solution. a very similar question is there anything I can help you with? Right? If you ask that question right at the end of your implementation project, the client might say, well, no, nothing at this point, thank you, bye. And you're sort of cutting that ability to do repeated business. Or you have to enter into another sales cycle where you will have to sell to them again. And it's a similar story when you do things like, hey, do you have a strategic plan? That's actually a much worse question, because not only the answer to that question is almost 95 to 99% no, but more importantly, it sort of puts the business owner in a kind of tricky situation when they say, well, I don't have a strategic plan. Look how incompetent I am in front of you. And you don't want people to feel like they're incompetent or they're doing something bad, right? When I say improve your communications, you can basically do that by sort of changing the way you frame the discussion. And on the sales cycle specifically, you might want to try things like, what other areas can I apply similar solution to generate better results for you? Right? This is far more powerful question where you say, okay, I already proven to you that I can deliver value. Where else can I add value? Right? Similar is, what other problems can I solve for you? Now, this question in particular is very important to ask when do you have at least a draft of a growth plan? Because if you look at that prioritized pain point list, you can specifically say, which of those problems do you want me to solve for you next? And that's part of the prioritization. Following that, you can actually sort of insert a little bit of that at the very beginning by saying, hey, can I maybe, I got to know your business a little bit through working with you over the last 3 months or so. Can I maybe draft a little expansion plan for your team? And it is a little bit of a yes and no kind of question, but it's very hard for any business owner to say no to that kind of question, because if they want to grow their business, and most businesses do, there is nothing wrong in having an expansion plan. Sometimes they will ask, well, how much? If you create some templates and just create sort of like a draft, maybe not full plan, you can deliver a draft for free, and that will help with your sales cycle. So now I would like to sort of take you for a little example, where I will sort of show the entire path, and maybe that will help you understand where we're at, or how I implemented that plan. So one thing that I was recently tasked to do was to help a small real estate agency migrate their CRM. And that comes back to this very beginning of the presentation. Clients might not have technical know-how. They sort of know that they need a better CRM. They don't really know what does better even mean. So they asked me, well, can you help us choose a better CRM? Because they knew that the one that they currently had wasn't really working for them. It was buggy, wasn't loading properly. There were all sorts of issues with it, and they were very unhappy to work on it on a day-to-day basis. But I also asked me, well, we don't know how to set things up. We're not good with software. Can you do that for us? The other thing was, well, we don't know how to move all the history of our deals from the past to this new software. And we don't want to retype everything manually. That would take months. Can you migrate data for us somehow? And then they said, well, can you sort of like show us how to use it, right? So a rather simple project. Migrating CRMs is nothing too special, but I think this example is going to serve well at the end, where you're going to see how I took this to the next level. Okay, so where did I start? At first, I wanted to understand what is exactly their customer journey that those real estate agents facilitate. Because for any CRM, it's good to understand that, because what you want to do is map the customer journey onto the pipeline or to the funnel that the clients go through. This way that CRM actually generates value because you can qualify buyers or sellers. And by doing that, I sort of figure out, okay, at what point in time someone becomes a lead before they're a prospect, how they transition from a prospect to a client. Is there anything that we need to track on the side when they are actually clients? And from there, I sort of charted, okay, how am I going to build this new pipeline? But first, I needed to migrate the data. And what I was specifically doing is taking data from a CRM called OnePage CRM. And through my analysis, it turns out that PipeDrive as a CRM is a much better solution for them. Those are just images taken from the internet. Unfortunately, the solution and the client's data is somewhat proprietary to them, so I couldn't post that for you here. But effectively, what I've done is migrated the data and then applied the custom pipeline that I've built for them with all the rules for it, such that they can now transition their deals between different columns and automatically qualify buyers or sellers. So thus far, nothing out of the ordinary, typical implementation project, right? Now the question is, how can we do this better, right? So right at the end of the project, I started to sort of peel the layers from the onion of that business and say, okay, now that you have a CRM, now that you can manage your deals in a more effective and efficient way, how can I help you use that software to grow your business? And initially they were like, well, we don't know, but what do you propose? And I said, well, what are your objectives for your business? What is your next 3 months? How would you like to grow your business? Do you have any marketing strategy? Do you have any communication strategy? So through a bunch of different questions, it turns out that they do have aspirations to grow their agency, but the main thing for them was they would like to introduce more custom data points that they can capture about specific deals, not just financials and not just addresses and phone numbers, and sort of introduce some automation, because each time when they do this, the process is very much the same because it's highly regulated by provincial regulations. Therefore, it's very repetitive kind of business, but not only repetitive from introducing repeated clients, but repetitive in terms of every client's journey looks exactly the same. So they want to automate as much of that as possible. But then I said, well, if there is any form of automation that we can do, maybe we can automate it outside of this system. And they sort of look at me and say, well, what do you mean by that? And this is where the coaching side came into play. And I said, well, how about we automate some of your marketing campaigns in conjunction with your CRM? And this is where opening their spectrum of technical know-how comes into play. And I said, well, how about we do your postcards through CRM and through Zapier integration? And this is where we sort of look at their marketing plans. We chose marketing as the top priority, as a pain point for them, because thus far, all of their mailing campaigns that they were doing were fairly manual. There are companies that they can do it for you, but they charge actually quite a lot. They charge around $5 to $10 per letter or per postcard that can be sent out to specific zip codes. And it's actually very easy to spend thousands of dollars and have very little return. So I asked them, well, what is the objective? And I said, well, we want one client to be with our agency for life. And I mean, what do you mean by having them for life? They said, well, once we add someone into the pipeline, yes, they are a prospect and they're a client, but once we make a deal with them, we either sell their property or we help them purchase a property. We want that client to be our client forever. We want them to do the next deal with us. We want their children to do the next deal with us. We want the family members to do the deal with us. And I said, okay, how do you engage with people that no longer need to buy or sell next year? How do you even stay relevant to them? And they say, what we do is we send them postcards, either for Christmas or for their birthday, because this is where we can remind them that we exist. And specifically, birthday and Christmas are two most relevant ones because they carry positive emotion. And beginning of the year is where a lot of real estate market sort of resumes after the Christmas break. So that moment when they remind, hey, I remember this real estate agent, he was good, then they recommend people on Christmas parties. So I said, well, how can we automate that? And I found a solution through a company called ClickSend, which allows you to send postcards, customized postcards based on automation managed by Zapier. For those of you who are not familiar, Zapier is like an automation hub. It basically, think of it as a translation layer between two different pieces of software. If those two pieces cannot directly speak to each other, it is common that Zapier will be able to facilitate communication between them and facilitate specifically automation coming from either of them. So now, whenever a new client is reported to have birthday, which is now a custom field on Pipedrive, has a birthday this month, Zapier takes that data and gives it to ClickSend. And ClickSend has a template for a birthday card with the real estate agency design and sends that automatically. I think the cost per card is $1.79, which is US, that is, which is far cheaper than manual solutions that are available in the local market. So now, what does this have to do with measuring effectiveness? Well, the thing is that this is a very simple, rather cheap solution. And what we're trying to measure now is, do we have a higher rate of referrals from existing clients? And that is also something that I introduce a custom field in Pipedrive, that if one client is referring another client, I have that data. We also are measuring, is there a higher rate of repeated business? Meaning, this the same client came back after a year or two. Turns out that in this very hot market, people change where they live something like every 5 to 6 years, where it used to be a home for a lifetime or for like 30 years. Another element that we're starting to track, and this is something for the future, is lifetime customer value. So, like I was said, if referrals comes into play, it's very easy to start accumulating them and saying, hey, this one person referred me to 5 different people. And because of that, I was able to grow my business. But also this particular client is a source of value for me. Therefore, high valued customers, you can do different marketing strategies for that. And now that we have this data, we want to measure that. And lastly, we want to reduce the manual effort. So we don't want anyone to manually address envelopes. We don't want anyone to lick stamps or do whatever. We want this to be fully automated because not only it saves time, but it also ensures consistency, right? Automated systems tend to be more consistent. They don't forget like people do. So that's the solution that I applied, and that sort of creates that repeated business for me. Now I'm looking into doing some other marketing tools like Buffer and other systems that they can take data from Pipedrive and do specific marketing campaigns based on that. And again, that's generating repeated business. So that sort of concludes my presentation. I hope it was useful and you find it interesting. If you did, please get in touch. Here's my email and my website. Feel free to connect with me over LinkedIn. If there are any specific questions, I think we can now sort of open the floor a little bit. And with that, thank you very much for your attention. Are there any questions in the, I don't see this chat over here.
Hi, Gerard. I've been monitoring the Q&A section for you. There is, it's not a question, but there's a comment in there that says, not a question, but we love you, Gerard. But I actually have some questions because your presentation was quite informative, and I really liked how you walked us through the customer journey with a case study as well, and hearing about the different softwares. My question is related to your slide with the questions where it's like, don't ask this, but ask this instead. I noticed on the don't ask, it's closed-ended questions that people can say yes or no to. And if they say that, it kind of ends the conversation. And on the ask side, they're all open-ended. So what are the areas? Can we apply this solution to generate better results? It gets people thinking. Is there ever an appropriate time to ask a closed-ended question? And if there is, what might that look like?
I would say, think of all of this as directional, right? So there is no like right or wrong answer here. But I would sort of focus on close-ended questions to be more implementation specific, right? So when you're designing the solution to the problem that you're consulting on, let's say maybe you're a copywriter, right? Or you're a marketing specialist and you're coming in and you're helping a business grow their customer base. What you might want to do is ask closed-end questions for implementation details, like where are you going to promote this? Which tools? Do you have like character limits? Which printing agency are you going to use? So sort of like very specific questions that will help you narrow down your constraints on the implementation details. When it comes to the coaching side of things, where you want to work with the other side and sort of allow them to grow as professionals in their area, but also as someone who can work with you to have that repeated business, you want to basically what you want to do is you want to continue the conversation, right? So let's say you're a marketing specialist. Let's stick with that. I'm not, so maybe my questions will not be very relevant, but effectively what you want to do is say, let's just say that you just finished maybe a marketing campaign that went over Facebook and you generated new traffic. The traffic resulted in new sales. Where then you can say, is there any other platform that you're currently using that I can maybe apply similar campaign to? And they might say no, but then that opens out for you, well, did you consider doing LinkedIn campaigns, right? And they might say no, and then you can say, well, I would, and this is how I would do it. But effectively, even though they might say yes or no, it doesn't really matter because it leads to the next, that continuous conversation. How can I implement similar solution somewhere else or to a different pain point? Okay. Right? So you're on the coaching side of things, you want to work with people and keep the conversation going such that it leads to the next solution. It's sort of part of the sales, but it also is ability for the business owner to sort of realize, hey, actually there is more potential, right?
Okay. So then you're using your questions to kind of guide their thought process and help them opening up as well.
Precisely. And this is sort of where executive coaching comes into play, because full-on executive coaching, for the most part, focuses on developing leadership skills, right? And those tend to be more on the communication, but in terms of inside business communication, providing good feedback, being able to receive feedback, building greater empathy for employees and their problems and their growing teams. Those are typical executive coaching topics. But how do you do it? Well, you're not a teacher. You're not coming into the business and say, hey, I'm an executive coach. You're going to listen to me because I'm a teacher and I'll sit for 45 minutes or tell you exactly what to do. You're not going to get great results for that. When you engage in a conversation, you say, did you think about that? How are you doing this? Did you ever engage that problem and how did you solve that problem? Is that problem something you can, or solution to that problem, is that something you can apply somewhere else? And keeping the conversation going, you're getting them to think, right? So this is where they grow as individuals. If you can marry some of those concepts with the aspect of your consultancy, right? Then you enter into an opportunity for repeated business. And that's sort of the entire purpose of all of this.
That makes a lot of sense. My next question is kind of related. So obviously it sounds like the questions are a big part of it because it opens up the conversation. But do you have any further advice to ask these questions to help uncover your client's pain points without them getting defensive?
That's actually a very good question. The reason you don't start with this right away, you sort of wait till you can actually show that you can implement some solution to a problem and you can showcase some positive results, is because you need to establish trust with the other side. Because imagine yourself coming to a business, cold calling or knocking on their door and ask, hey, what are your problems? I'm here to solve them all. Someone is just going to slam the door in front of your face, right? So you start with the sales process, typical sales process. You go through this implementation of whatever is that you're tasked to do, and that helps you build some relationship with them. Then often you're going to notice, okay, I've helped you with this, but we're all professionals, so within our own realm of things that we are professionals in, we see problems. When I came into that real estate agency, I see that people don't really know how to properly use computer, let alone CRMs. But that's okay because they're not IT specialists, they're real estate agents. And as real estate agents, they're amazing. They don't need to be IT specialists at the same time, right? But what I see is that they are doing a lot of things that software could do for them, right? So then I sort of frame it, okay, what is your marketing strategy? Where do you spend money on marketing? And I say, well, we tried Facebook ads, but it didn't really work, so we're not spending anymore. Okay, why didn't it work? So this is where you can start peeling the layers, right? Another way about it is you want to sort of, what you want to do is find similar problem, right? So when I did this CRM for them, I know that they also have accounting issues. I'm not an accountant, and when it comes to specifically accounting, you also need to be a certified accountant to do a lot of this stuff, right? So even though I can recognize this as a pain point for them, not something I want to engage, so I will not engage on that discussion. However, when I see that, for instance, they have issues with their office setup, right? I'm not necessarily a printer guy, but I can tell that they have like outdated computers, they don't use antivirus software or what have you. Those are the kind of areas that I can help them with the business. So you say, hey, I noticed those three things. Are those your main problems? Is this something I can help? And they were like, no, actually, this is not that relevant. I have far bigger deals on my head. And I'm like, what are those deals? And again, you can ask those questions because you have trust. You have some relationship. If you try to do it without that, people will not open up to you, right?
No, thank you for sharing that. And still on the questions, because it's such a big component of coaching, is what advice would you give to people who struggle to come up with questions to ask? Like, how do I formulate my next question? I know I need to ask something. How do you keep having questions and having that genuine curiosity?
I would say practice makes perfect. For me, in particular, you might not believe me right now, but I always struggle with public speaking. And not only that, English is my third language. So I was always very self-conscious of how I communicate in English because grammar, pronunciation. I also have maybe not super heavy accent, but I still have it. So I was very self-conscious of it, right? And going to Toastmasters helped me quite a lot because it's a safe environment in which you can fail, and if you fail, nothing happens, right? Because it's just a community of like-minded people who are also trying to improve their public speaking skills. So I would advise on engaging something like Toastmasters or other public speaking courses. Another thing I would say is doing entry-level coaching certification also might be quite empowering. You don't have to necessarily become an actual executive coach, but if you will do basic classes at Canadian Coaching Federation, I think they are something like $850, $900, which you can expense as a business expense. I actually did most of my certification and used the government grants for business development. So 60% of that was paid back by the province. So effectively for $400, I obtained one of the certificates. And it's a 2-day training where they actually ask you, they actually teach you how to ask better questions. They have materials where you can go through that. They have templates. So actually investing a little bit of money and a little bit of time into growing your coaching skills, even though you might not necessarily be a coach, might not be a good idea as well.
No, I think that's great advice. And I never knew there were government grants to help with that kind of professional development. So that's some great insight for our listeners.
Yes, so if you look at the BC Education Ministry of Education, they had a link on their main page. I don't know if I will be able to find it right now, but what it was there were reskilling grants that were paying up to 80% for trades. And a lot of people dismiss that at this point. They said, well, I'm not in trades, I'm not a carpenter or a plumber. But if you read to the very end of the document, it says that there is actually a secondary program for reskilling when you're changing either careers or you're expanding your business. The catch is that they are refunding up to 60% of your cost, right? So not 80, 60%, but that's still quite a lot of money.
That is. And kind of going back into your experience again, you mentioned that some of your clients in the past are not the most tech savvy. And in my experience, with some companies that aren't tech savvy, IT just isn't one of the priorities. And the projects you're helping them implement, they are quite expensive. Mm-hmm. Did you ever have a client that did not want to put in that upfront investment? And what did you ask them to identify a pain point so strong that they're like, okay, we're going to invest?
I would say that's most of the cases, right? Because I think it's the new norm that you go to a Google Play Store or something and you download a piece of software for free and you can play with it. And it sort of gives you an illusion of having value by working with free software. Typically, when you really want to do something productive, they will ask for like $5 a month per user, right? And by the time you add the entire small company, I don't know, 10, 20 people for one piece of software, second, third, fourth, it's like $5 per user here, $5 per user there. And it turns out that it's like $10,000 a month to run an organization, right? The main thing is if your solutions lead to better performance in the organization, and you can effectively show, I've done A, result B generated X dollars. If you can map it, right? That's why having OKRs is so important, because many people get attached to KPIs, but KPIs measure your performance from the past to this point, and you're comparing how much you're deviating from your target, right? But you're here not to measure the past because you were not a consultant at that company 3 months ago. You're a consultant now. So there is no KPI that you can look to. But if you set an OKR, which are forward-facing metrics, right? Objective and key result. So your objective is to increase traffic on the website. Key result is I will have 20,000 new members, right? And you measure your marketing strategy and the results towards that OKR. If by the end you say, hey, I've achieved that OKR, and the result of that OKR is increased sales, now you have more budget in your operational sheet to implement that software. And you say, my next OKR will be another increase, right? You're sort of giving them the sort of reassurance that they're not going to run out of money. But that's why it's so important to measure things, right? That's what I say. If you're going to remember anything from this presentation, measure effectiveness is your measure of your success. If you can show that what you're doing has a positive effect on your business, it's going to be much easier to sell.
I wrote that down because you said that's going to be a key takeaway. And in case you quizzed us on it, I was ready. But you actually answered my question about OKR versus deliverables and KPI. So thank you for that. I have one last question before we run out of time today. And for closing remarks is, where do I pick up my new favorite t-shirt that says I'm a project manager, but I'm not?
I'll send you a link. Okay. It is available on Redbubble and on Teespring.
Teespring? You're very resourceful. You have all these links ready to be shared. So with that being said, thank you so much, Gerard, and thank you attendees for joining this session.